Daniel called me on a Monday afternoon, which was unusual enough that I checked the screen twice before answering. He wasn't someone who called often. He preferred short messages when something needed confirming, and voicemails when something needed avoiding. Calls usually meant there was a reason sitting just beneath the conversation. So when I heard his voice warm, easy, almost rehearsed, I noticed that first. "Mum," he said, "what are you doing for Thanksgiving?" I was standing at the sink, my hands in dishwater that had already gone lukewarm. A chipped white bowl rested in front of me, one I kept meaning to throw away and never did. Outside the window, two sparrows argued over the feeder. It was an ordinary moment, the kind you don't mark as important until later. "I hadn't made big plans," I said. "Probably just stay home, roast something small." There was a pause, not long, just enough for me to register it. "Well," he continued, "Vanessa and I were talking, and the kids would love to have you here this year. It wouldn't feel right without you." At the time, I let that sentence settle exactly where he intended. It wouldn't feel right without you. Certain phrases linger longer than they should, not because they're dramatic, but because they arrive when you've gone too long without hearing them. It had been a while since anyone in my family spoke, as if my presence itself mattered. Not what I brought, not what I could fix, not what I could quietly provide, but simply me. I dried my hands slowly and leaned against the counter. "You mean that?" I asked. "Of course I do." His answer came quickly, perhaps a little too quickly. On another day, I might have examined that. But when you've gone too long without being chosen, you stop inspecting the invitation. 10 minutes later, Vanessa texted. "We're excited to see you. Kids can't wait. Let me know your flight info once you book." There was a red heart at the end. I don't usually read into things like that. But I read into that one. I read into all of it. So I booked the ticket. Denver to Raleigh, Thanksgiving Day, mid-morning departure, one checked suitcase. Aisle seat. I've reached the age where climbing over strangers feels less like inconvenience and more like negotiation. I paid a little extra for early boarding. I told myself it was for my knees, which was partly true. The other part was that I wanted to arrive composed. Wanted, invited women tend to arrive composed. I packed the next morning. Not all at once, in small, deliberate choices. A cardigan first, then black slacks that still fit properly if I stood straight. A cranberry-coloured blouse I wore when I wanted to feel put together. I wrapped 2 books for the children. Slipped a tin of almond cookies into the side pocket. Vanessa once said she liked them with coffee. That may have been years ago. Still, I remembered it. Memory can be generous that way. It keeps old preferences alive long after they've stopped being relevant. By Wednesday evening, my suitcase was zipped and waiting by the door. The house was in order. Trash taken out. Thermostat lowered. Coffee maker emptied. Small procedures that make leaving feel responsible. I stood in the hallway for a moment, purse on my shoulder, looking at the framed photos along the console table. Daniel at 8, missing a front tooth. Chloe at 12, holding a ribbon from a science fair. My husband, in a wool coat, outside Fenway Park, smiling into the cold. I touched the corner of that frame briefly, then picked up my phone and sent Daniel my itinerary. Landing 3:10 p.m., Thursday. "I'll text when I'm on the ground." He responded with a thumbs up. Vanessa wrote, "Perfect. That should have been enough." But somewhere beneath all of that neat coordination, something small caught. Not fear, not even doubt. Just a thin thread, like fabric snagging on something you can't quite see. At the time, I didn't have words for it. Later, I did. Some people mistake silence for permission. I didn't think that sentence clearly then, but I felt its outline. The airport in Denver was crowded in the way. Holiday airports always are too bright, too full. People carrying casseroles in insulated bags, Children dragging stuffed animals across polished floors. A man ahead of me in security tried to bring cranberry sauce through in a plastic container and seemed genuinely surprised when he couldn't. A young woman near the gate cried quietly into her coffee, not making a scene, just holding something in. I noticed all of it. Details have always been easier to hold on to than expectations. The flight boarded a little late. I checked the time and told myself Daniel might be running behind too. For some reason, that thought felt reassuring. It made him seem reachable, human, slightly disorganized in a way I could account for. I bought a bottle of water and one of those protein boxes with apple slices that taste faintly of refrigeration. On the plane, I sat beside a man who fell asleep before takeoff and didn't wake until we landed. I spent most of the flight looking out the window, letting the hours pass without assigning them meaning. When we landed, I smoothed my skirt out of habit, brushed a few crumbs from my lap. I had worn my better shoes, the black ones with the small heel, not for comfort, for presentation. I wanted to look like someone who belonged there. I landed at 3:14, close enough to the scheduled time that it shouldn't have mattered. The airport in Raleigh smelled like floor polish and cinnamon from a nearby stand. I texted Daniel when the plane touched down. Landed, heading to baggage claim now. No reply. That didn't concern me immediately. Airports rearrange time, people get delayed, children spill things. Traffic stacks at the curb. I understand how those things work. I waited at Carousel 6 and watched people reunite. A boy in a green sweatshirt ran straight into his grandfather's knees. A woman in a business coat hugged someone so tightly her heel slipped. Two teenagers held a sign covered in glitter that read, "Welcome home, Aunt Lisa." My suitcase came eventually. Dark blue. One wheel slightly louder than the others. Still no message. I moved toward arrivals and stood beneath a hanging sign near ground transportation. The automatic doors opened and closed in steady intervals, letting in small bursts of cold air. People moved around me with purpose, one hand on a bag, one eye on the curb, each person oriented toward someone. At 3:32, I called Daniel. It rang 6 times. Voicemail. I didn't leave a message. It felt unnecessary. At 3:41, I texted Vanessa. I'm at arrivals near Zone C with my bag. No rush. Just letting you know where I am. Delivered. No reply. I adjusted my coat over my arm and stayed where I was. I could have sat, but sitting would have made the waiting visible. There's a difference between waiting and being left. As long as I remained standing, I could still place myself in the first category. A man in an airport vest pushed a line of empty chairs past me. Somewhere behind me, a child kept asking for pretzels in the same tone until his mother gave in. A television in the corner played silent news with captions scrolling across a weather map. None of it had anything to do with me, and yet I remember all of it, because something had already started to feel off. At 3:48, my phone buzzed. My attention lifted before I even looked, but it wasn't Daniel. It wasn't Vanessa. It was a social media notification. I almost ignored it. Then I didn't. There are moments when something shifts before you can name it. When the air changes slightly, even though everything looks the same, I opened the app. And there they were. Daniel in a charcoal sweater, Vanessa smiling beside him. The children seated around a long table, lit warmly from above. Turkey, candles, plates already in use. Someone halfway through a slice of pie. Everyone positioned carefully. The way people arrange themselves when they want the image to say more than the truth. The caption read, "Full table, full hearts." Grateful for family. That's when the room went quiet. Not literally. The airport continued around me, doors opening, footsteps, distant laughter. But internally, everything cooled at once. I looked at the image again. Slower this time. No empty chair, no place held back, no sign of delay. The dinner had already happened, and they had known enough to capture it. My hand tightened slightly on the suitcase handle. A few seconds later, Daniel texted. Running behind. Be there soon. I read the message, then glanced back at the photo. And that's when something settled into place. It wasn't just the lie. It was the assumption behind it. That I would accept whatever version they gave me. That I would smooth it over. That I would arrive grateful and remain manageable. Some people mistake silence for permission. I slipped my phone back into my purse. Not abruptly, just with intention. Then I put on my coat, lifted my suitcase, and turned away from the pickup doors. I didn't call again. I didn't reply. And I didn't cry there. I chose, instead, to see what the truth looked like once I stopped holding it together for them. I didn't leave the airport right away. That's something I remember clearly, even if the exact minutes blur a little now. I walked past the pickup lanes, past the line of cars idling with their hazard lights blinking, and kept going until the foot traffic thinned. The kind of space where people either know exactly where they're headed, or they've stopped expecting to be met. The air outside carried that late November edge. Not sharp yet, but certain. It slipped under my collar and settled there. I kept moving, not quickly, not slowly, just enough to give my thoughts somewhere to go. A few blocks down, I noticed a small diner tucked between a gas station and a closed tire shop. The sign flickered slightly. Maggie's Grill, and the windows were fogged from the warmth inside. Paper leaves had been taped along the glass, curling at the edges. It didn't look like it was trying too hard. That felt right. I went in. A bell chimed overhead. The place smelled like butter, coffee, and something baked recently enough to still hold heat. A few people were scattered through the booths. An older couple eating without speaking. A delivery driver scrolling through his phone. A waitress wiping down the counter with a steady, practiced rhythm. "Happy Thanksgiving," she said, glancing up. "Same to you," I replied. My voice surprised me again, still steady. I chose a booth by the window and slid in, setting my suitcase beside me like it belonged there. "Kitchen's a little backed up," the waitress said, handing me a menu. "But we've got turkey, pie, all the usual." "Pie sounds fine," I said. "What kind?" "Pumpkin." "Good choice." She gave a small nod and moved on. I didn't reach for my phone. That mattered more than anything else that day. Not the walk. Not the diner. Not even the photo. The decision not to check again. While I waited, I watched the window. Cars pulled in and out of the gas station next door. A man in a red jacket tapped the side of a fuel pump like it might respond to encouragement. The sky had gone flat and grey, the kind that doesn't offer much interpretation. Just a quiet reminder that the day would end whether anyone was ready for it or not. The pie arrived on a white plate, a small lean of whipped cream already softening at the edges. I took a bite. It was warm, a little too sweet, the crust thicker than I would have made it. But it was good, not because of the recipe. Because it wasn't made for anyone else. I ate slowly. Didn't rush, didn't scroll, didn't look toward the door expecting it to open. They weren't coming. Not today. And something in me finally stopped preparing for them to. That's when everything shifted. Not in a way anyone else in that diner would have noticed. Just a quiet adjustment. I wasn't waiting anymore. I was choosing. The waitress came back with the check and asked, "Want another slice to go?" I paused for a moment, then nodded. "Yes," she smiled. "Best decision you'll make today." I almost laughed, but instead I gave a small nod. Because she was probably right. By the time I stepped back outside, the light had changed. Late afternoon now, slipping toward evening. The temperature had dropped just enough to make the air feel sharper. I walked back toward the airport, but not all the way. About 2 blocks short, I saw the motel. Valley Inn. Beige siding. A humming vending machine near the office door. A sign with faded red letters advertising weekly rates. It wasn't where I had planned to stay, But then again, I hadn't planned to be standing in that city alone. Inside, a man behind the counter glanced up from a small television. "Need a room?" "Yes," I said. "Just for the night." He slid a form across the counter. ID and card. I handed them over without comment. The process was simple, efficient, transactional in a way that felt almost reassuring after the ambiguity of the afternoon. "Room 114, he said, pushing a key toward me. "End of the row." "Thank you." The room was exactly what it appeared to be. 2 lamps with mismatched shades, a bedspread patterned in muted browns, a heater that clicked on a second too late. The kind of place that doesn't pretend to be anything more than it is. I set my suitcase down and sat on the edge of the bed. Only then did I turn my phone over. 3 missed calls from Daniel, 2 from Vanessa, 1 message. "Mum, where are you?" No apology, no explanation. Just confusion, as if I had misplaced myself somewhere along the way. I read it once, then again, then placed the phone back on the table without replying. At the time, I didn't fully understand why I felt so steady. Later, I realized it wasn't calm, it was clarity. This wasn't the first time. That realization didn't arrive all at once. It came, the way patterns usually do quietly, through memory. The first one surfaced, without warning. A Christmas from a few years back. I was in my kitchen before sunrise, wrapping a ham in foil. The radio was playing something soft. Bing Crosby, I think. The window had fogged slightly from the heat of the oven. Daniel had called the night before. "Mom, we might be a little late tomorrow. Kids have something in the morning." "That's fine," I told him. "We'll text when we're on the way." I set the table anyway, 4 places. Then 6, just in case. I even used the nicer plates, the ones with the thin blue rim. By noon, the ham was done. By 1, the potatoes had started to dry at the edges. By 2, I turned the oven off and wrapped everything back up. At 2:17, Daniel texted, running behind. "Rain check?" No call. No explanation. I remember standing there with the serving spoon in my hand, looking at a table that had already been decided against. That was the first time the room went quiet. Back in the motel, I stood and walked over to the small desk by the window. I took out my notebook. It's a simple one, spiral bound, mostly used for grocery lists and things I didn't want to forget. I opened to a blank page. For a moment, I held the pen without writing. Then I wrote, "I am not extra." The sentence looked abrupt at first, too direct. So I added another line beneath it. "I am not optional." I underlined both. At the time, it didn't feel like anything significant. Just a note. Something to hold on to before the feeling softened into habit again. But looking back, that was the first piece of evidence. Not for anyone else, for me. I closed the notebook and set it beside the bed. The heater clicked again, louder this time. Outside, a car passed slowly, tires brushing against the pavement. I didn't cry, not because it didn't hurt, but because the hurt had already been spread out over years. What I felt then wasn't sharp. It was accumulated. And accumulation, when you finally allow yourself to see it, doesn't always arrive as pain. Sometimes it arrives as decision. The second memory didn't come immediately. It surfaced later that evening. After I had unpacked just enough to feel settled, my toothbrush on the sink, my cardigan folded over the back of the chair. Small adjustments. Temporary, but deliberate. I was sitting on the edge of the bed, the television on, but muted. Some holiday movie played in the background, people moving through scenes of warmth that felt a little too coordinated to be real. I wasn't watching it, just letting the light shift across the room. That's when it returned. A spring afternoon. Chloe's recital. She must have been 9 or 10. What I remember most is the auditorium, the faint smell of dust and varnished wood, the way the stage lights made everything just slightly too bright to look at directly. I had arrived early. Sat in the third row, slightly to the left, close enough to see her face clearly when she stepped onto the stage. Daniel had said they would meet me there. Traffic might be bad, he mentioned the night before, but we'll be there. I believed him. At the time, I always did. I held a small bouquet in my lap, white daisies wrapped in clear plastic. They made a soft, crinkling sound each time I adjusted my grip. I kept smoothing the edges, as if presentation might matter more if I did. Parents began filling the seats around me. Conversations layered over one another. Programs rustled. Someone behind me laughed too loudly, then lowered their voice, remembering where they were. I kept glancing toward the entrance. Each time the door opened, I expected to see them. Each time, it was someone else. The recital began. Children walked onto the stage in careful lines, their movements rehearsed but still uncertain at the edges. Chloe stepped out about halfway through. She wore a pale blue dress, her hair pulled back tighter than she liked. She scanned the audience. I saw her do it, just for a second. Her eyes moved across the rows, searching. Then she found me, and she smiled. It was small, controlled. The kind of smile a child gives when they adjust to what is, instead of what they hoped for. She played beautifully. Steady hands, focused posture. She didn't rush, didn't falter. When it ended, the room filled with applause. I stood immediately, clapped longer than I needed to, not to compensate for anything, just to be present. Afterward, I waited near the side exit where the children came out. Parents gathered in clusters, hugging, praising, taking photos. I held the bouquet carefully, making sure not to crush it. Chloe came through the door and walked straight to me. "Did you see?" she asked. "I saw everything," I said. She nodded. Then, after a small pause, she asked, "Did Mom and Dad come?" There are moments when the truth sits right at the surface, and you can feel how easily it could slip out. I adjusted the ribbon around the flowers. "They had something come up," I said, "but I'll tell them how well you did." She nodded again. No protest, no disappointment, expressed out loud. Just that same quiet adjustment. "Okay," she said. That was the second time something settled in me without fully forming. Back in the motel room, I turned the television off. The silence returned, but it didn't feel empty. It felt instructive, like it was pointing at something I had been choosing not to follow. I picked up my phone again. No new messages. I opened the conversation with Daniel and scrolled. Not far. Just enough to see the pattern. Short messages, delayed responses, requests framed as invitations. And beneath all of it, a kind of consistency I had mistaken for normal. That's the thing about patterns. They don't announce themselves. They repeat quietly until you decide to name them. I set the phone aside and leaned back against the headboard. The room felt smaller now, but not uncomfortable. Defined. That's when the third memory surfaced, not triggered by anything obvious, just present. A late summer afternoon, hot enough that the air felt heavy, even indoors. I had all the windows open, trying to catch whatever breeze might pass through. Daniel had stopped by unexpectedly. He stood in the doorway for a moment, keys in his hand, not quite stepping all the way inside. "Hey, Mom," he said. "Hi," I replied. "Come in." He did, but only halfway, like he was already on his way out. "I won't stay long," he added. "That's all right." I went to the kitchen and poured 2 glasses of iced tea. When I came back, he was looking around the room, not really at anything specific. Just scanning. "You ever think about downsizing?" he asked. I set the glasses down on the table. "Sometimes," I said. "This place is a lot for one person. It's manageable." He nodded, then took a sip. "I mean, if you ever decided to sell," he continued, "you could probably get a good price. The market's been strong." I remember the way he said it. Casual. As if it were just a passing thought. At the time, I didn't question it. "I haven't made any decisions," I told him. Of course, he said quickly. Just something to think about. He stayed for maybe 10 more minutes, left with a quick hug and a promise to call soon. He didn't. Not for a while. Back in the motel, I sat with that memory for a moment. Then I reached for my notebook again, turned to a new page, and wrote, "Patterns don't need permission to continue, they just need silence." I paused after that, read it once, then added another line beneath it, "And I have been very quiet." That was harder to write, not because it wasn't true, but because it was. I closed the notebook slowly, set it back on the desk, and stood. The room hadn't changed, but I had. Not suddenly, not completely, but enough. Enough to understand that this trip, this moment, wasn't an exception. It was confirmation. I didn't sleep deeply that night. Not because the bed was uncomfortable, it was, but because my mind had started organizing things differently. Not emotionally, structurally. I woke a little before 6 a.m., the room still dim, the heater clicking on in uneven intervals. For a moment, I stayed still, watching the light stretch faintly across the ceiling. Then I got up, showered, dressed, packed my suitcase with the same care I had used 2 days earlier, though the intention had changed. This wasn't preparation anymore. It was closure. By 7:10, I was in the car the motel had called for me. The driver nodded when I gave him the terminal number and adjusted the radio to something low and instrumental. Outside, the city moved slowly, as if it hadn't fully committed to the day yet. I didn't check my phone. Not on the way. Not at the drop-off lane. Not even as I stepped back into the airport, the same polished floors reflecting the overhead lights, the same distant announcements echoing through the space. Everything looked the same. That was the first thing I noticed. Nothing had shifted externally. That matters, because it's easy to expect clarity to arrive with some kind of visible signal, a confirmation, a change you can point to. But it doesn't. Sometimes the environment stays exactly as it is, and you're the only variable that moves. I checked my bag, went through security, found my gate, routine, predictable, contained. That helped. Around 8:05, I bought a coffee I didn't really want. It tasted burnt, but I drank it anyway. Holding something warm gave my hands a place to rest. I sat near the window and watched a plane taxi slowly across the runway. That's when I finally turned my phone over. 5 new messages, all from Daniel. "Where did you go? We were there. Why didn't you answer? Mum, please call me." We were worried. I read them in order, then read them again. The wording had shifted from confusion to concern to something closer to urgency. But even then, something was missing. Not what he said, what he didn't. No mention of the dinner, no acknowledgement of the photo, no attempt to reconcile the two. That's when I understood the difference between reaction and responsibility. One responds to absence, the other accounts for action. I locked my phone and placed it face down on the table beside me. That was the moment the decision settled fully. Not about them, about me. When I got home, I would not ask questions. I would not wait for explanations. I would not participate in a conversation designed to return things to their previous arrangement. I would verify. I would document. And then I would act. That's when everything became clear. The boarding announcement came a few minutes later. I stood, adjusted my coat, and stepped into line with everyone else. People moving forward in small increments, each carrying their own version of a destination. On the plane, I took the same kind of seat. Aisle, predictable. I fastened my seatbelt and rested my hands in my lap. For most of the flight, I didn't look out the window this time. I reviewed, not emotionally, procedurally, what I knew, what I had seen, what had been repeated, and what needed to change. By the time we landed, I wasn't uncertain anymore. I was organized. Back home, the house greeted me the way it always did. Quiet. Unchanged. The thermostat still low. The coffee maker still empty. Everything exactly where I had left it. I set my suitcase by the door and walked into the living room, sat in the same chair, waited for something to surface. Not a feeling, a direction. After a few minutes, I stood again and went to the desk, opened the top drawer, took out the folder, the one I hadn't looked at in a while. Inside were documents I had kept for years. Property records, account summaries, insurance forms. Nothing unusual, just information. I spread them across the desk, not searching yet, just arranging them where I could see everything at once. That's when I noticed it. A name. Daniels. Listed in a place I hadn't revisited in some time. Not incorrectly, not improperly. Just still there. From an earlier decision. Made under different assumptions. At the time, I hadn't questioned it. That stood out now. How easily something important can remain unchanged simply because it hasn't been reviewed. I sat down and read the document more closely. The date, the terms, the authorization. Everything was clear. Everything was valid. And everything was based on a version of trust that no longer existed in the same way. That was the first procedural inconsistency. Not dramatic, not urgent, but foundational. I reached for my notebook, opened to a fresh page, and wrote, "Review all accounts, remove assumptions, replace with structure." I underlined the last line once, then closed the notebook. The next morning, I called an attorney, not one I had used before. That mattered. I wanted a neutral starting point. The receptionist asked a few basic questions, then offered me an appointment later that week. I accepted. No hesitation, no delay. Because by then, the decision had already been made. I wasn't reacting anymore. I was proceeding. The attorney's office was on the third floor of a building. I had passed many times, but never entered. Glass doors, neutral carpeting, a directory in the lobby, with names arranged in clean, alphabetical order. The kind of place designed to feel quiet before anything important is said. I arrived 10 minutes early. That's a habit I've kept for years. Not out of anxiety, but preference. It gives me time to observe before I'm asked to respond. The waiting area was nearly empty. A man in a grey jacket flipped through a magazine without turning the pages. A woman at the front desk typed steadily, her posture unchanged each time someone entered. I checked in, gave my name, and sat down. There was a faint hum from the overhead lights. Somewhere deeper in the office, a door opened and closed. I noticed how evenly spaced the chairs were, how everything felt measured. At 10:02, my name was called. Not rushed, not delayed, just on time. The attorney introduced himself with a firm handshake and a brief nod, then led me into a private office with a wide desk and 2 chairs positioned deliberately across from each other. "Tell me how I can help," he said. I sat, placed my folder on the desk, and opened it. For a moment, I didn't speak. Not because I didn't know what to say, because I wanted to say it precisely. "I'd like to review my current estate structure," I began. "And make some adjustments." He nodded once, waiting. "I've had the same arrangement in place for several years," I continued. "At the time, it made sense, but circumstances have clarified." That word felt accurate. Clarified. He didn't ask for details right away. Instead, he said, "Let's start with what you currently have." That's when I handed him the documents. He reviewed them carefully, not quickly, not casually, page by page, occasionally making a small note on a legal pad beside him. The room stayed quiet while he read. I noticed the way he paused slightly longer on certain sections, the way his pen tapped once, then stilled. That's how you can tell when someone is actually paying attention. After a few minutes, he looked up. "You've listed your son as primary beneficiary," he said, "with broad access across multiple accounts." "Yes, and a power of attorney provision here," he added, tapping the page lightly. "Yes." He leaned back slightly. "Are you looking to modify beneficiaries' authority or both?" "Both," I said. No hesitation. That seemed to register, not emotionally, professionally. He nodded. All right. Then we'll approach this in layers. I appreciated that. Layers. Structure. Process. He began outlining what would need to be reviewed, what could be changed immediately, and what required additional documentation. Beneficiary designations can be updated directly, he explained. Power of attorney can be revoked and reassigned. If you want to establish a trust, that would provide additional control and continuity. I listened carefully. Not overwhelmed, not uncertain, just attentive. Clear information has a way of settling things. It removes the need for interpretation. That's what I want, I said. Control and continuity. He wrote something down, then looked back up. And who would you like to designate instead? I paused, not because I didn't know, because I wanted to say it without hesitation. My granddaughter, I said. Chloe. He nodded. Understood. There was no reaction beyond that. No question, no commentary, just acceptance of the instruction. That mattered more than anything. We moved through the rest of the meeting methodically. Accounts, property, access levels, contingencies. Each element reviewed, adjusted, or flagged for update. At one point, he said, once these changes are in place, previous access will no longer apply. I understand. He held my gaze briefly, as if confirming something unspoken, then continued. We'll prepare the revised documents for your review. You'll have time to go through everything before signing. Good. As the meeting came to a close, he gathered the papers into a neat stack. I'll have my office follow up within a few days, he said. If you have any questions in the meantime, don't hesitate to call. I won't, I replied, and I meant it, not because I expected confusion, because I no longer felt the need to revisit decisions once they had been made, clearly. When I stepped back outside, the air felt different than it had the day before. Not warmer, not softer, just clearer. That's the only word that fits. I walked to my car and sat there for a moment before starting the engine, not reflecting, not reconsidering, just allowing the process to settle. That's when my phone buzzed. Daniel. I watched the screen for a second, then answered. Hi, Mom. His voice carried urgency, but something else was there too. Uncertainty. Hi, Daniel. Where did you go? He asked. We were looking for you at the airport. I let that sit for a moment, not as a tactic, as a filter. You weren't, I said. What do you mean? I saw the photo, I replied. Silence. A long one. That's when the tone shifted. Not dramatically, but noticeably. We posted that earlier, he said. I see. It wasn't what it looked like. I didn't respond. I had already moved past appearances. Why didn't you answer your phone? He asked. I was occupied. With what? I looked out through the windshield. Cars moving, people crossing the street, everything continuing. I had other things to attend to, I said. Another pause. Then, Mom, we need to talk about this. Yes, I said. We do. When can we? I've already started, I said. That stopped him. What does that mean? It means I'm reviewing my arrangements, I replied. Arrangements? Yes. There was a slight change in his breathing. Recognition beginning to form. Mom, what are you talking about? I kept my tone even. The current structure no longer reflects reality, I said. So I'm updating it. Another silence, this one heavier. Processing. You don't need to do anything drastic, he said. I'm not, I replied. I'm doing something appropriate. He didn't answer right away. Then, quieter. We can fix this. I considered that, not emotionally, procedurally. No, I said. We can adjust going forward. That's what I mean. It isn't, I replied. And that was the moment he understood something had changed. Not in the situation, in me. We ended the call without resolution. No agreement, no argument, just acknowledgement. When I drove home, I didn't turn on the radio, didn't fill the space with anything unnecessary. The next steps were already in motion, and for the first time, I wasn't waiting for them to catch up. I was moving ahead. The follow-up from the attorney's office came 2 days later. A simple call. Clear, direct. "Your documents are ready for review," the assistant said. "You can come in any time this week." I scheduled it for Thursday morning, not because I needed more time, because I preferred a measured pace. In the meantime, something else began to shift. Not formally, socially. It started with a message from a neighbour. Mrs. Hargrove lived 2 houses down. We'd never been close, but we had a rhythm, brief conversations at the mailbox, small acknowledgements when passing by. Her message was short. "Hope your trip went well. Saw Daniel's post, looked like a nice evening." I read it once. Then again. There it was. The photo had circulated. Not widely, perhaps, but enough. That's how these things move. Quietly, without intention, without context. I didn't respond immediately. Not because I didn't have an answer, because I was deciding what kind of answer this situation required. About an hour later, I wrote back. It looked that way. Nothing more. No correction, no elaboration. Just a statement that allowed the image to remain intact without confirming its accuracy. That was the first social adjustment. Later that afternoon, I went to the grocery store. Routine again, familiar aisles, predictable choices. But as I moved through the produce section, I noticed something subtle. A woman I recognized, someone I'd seen at community events, paused for a moment as our eyes met. "Didn't you just travel?" she asked. "I did," I said. "Family visit?" "Yes," she smiled. "That's always nice." I returned the smile. "Yes," I said. "It can be." That was the second, not confrontation, not correction. Just a quiet awareness that perception had already begun forming outside of me. That's the thing about social lanes. They don't wait for confirmation. They build around what's visible. By the time Thursday arrived, I had already decided how I would handle that part, not by correcting every assumption, but by maintaining consistency in my own responses. At the attorney's office, the process continued exactly as expected, structured, deliberate. He walked me through each document, explained each revision, not in excess, not in abstraction, just enough to ensure clarity. "Here, we've updated the beneficiary designation," he said, sliding the page slightly forward. "Primary is now your granddaughter. Secondary contingent is listed here." I read it carefully, every line, every clause, not because I doubted him, because I was no longer delegating understanding. That's when everything became precise. "The power of attorney has been revoked and reassigned," he continued, effective immediately upon signing. I nodded. "And the trust structure?" I asked. "Established here," he said, indicating another section. "It centralizes asset control and defines distribution parameters." I read that twice, not because it was unclear, because it mattered. He gave me time. Didn't rush, didn't fill the silence. That's how you know you're in the right kind of room. After reviewing everything, I placed the pen on the paper, paused for just a second, not out of hesitation, out of acknowledgement, then signed. Each page, steady, consistent, no interruption. That's when the room went quiet. Not dramatically, just noticeably. The kind of quiet that follows completion. He gathered the documents and placed them into a folder. "These will be filed and executed accordingly," he said. "You'll receive confirmation once everything is processed." "Thank you," I replied. When I left the office, I didn't feel relief. That wasn't the right word. Relief suggests something has been lifted. This wasn't that. This was alignment. Everything now reflected what I understood to be true. Nothing more, nothing less. The financial lane had closed its first loop. Later that evening, Daniel called again. I let it ring once, twice, then answered. Hi. Mom, I've been trying to reach you. I know. We need to talk in person. About what? There was a pause. Then, about everything. I considered that. Be specific, I said. Another pause, longer this time. About what you said, he replied. About changing things. I've already done that, I said. Silence, not confusion, recognition. You already? Yes. That was fast. It was necessary. His tone shifted again. Less urgency, more calculation. You should have told me. I'm telling you now. That's not the same. No, I said. It isn't, he exhaled. I could hear it through the line. Mum, this affects a lot of things. Yes, you don't need to make decisions like this on your own. I do, I said. And I have. That's when the dynamic changed, not outwardly. Internally, the assumption of shared authority had been removed. You're overreacting, he said. I didn't respond immediately. Not because I was unsure, because I was choosing the correct level of response. No, I said. I'm responding appropriately. That's not how it feels. I understand that. Another pause. Then, quieter, we can work this out. We can define new terms, I said. But the previous ones are no longer in place. He didn't argue that, not directly, because something in him had already registered the shift. We ended the call shortly after. No resolution, no agreement, just adjustment. Over the next few days, small confirmations began arriving. Emails, letters, notifications, each one brief, each one precise, changes recorded, access updated, authority reassigned. No fanfare, no announcement, just process completing itself. That's how institutional tightening works. It doesn't escalate, it finalizes. By the following week, everything had been implemented. Accounts reflected the new structure. Documents were filed. The system had caught up with the decision. That's when the pressure shifted. Not on me, on him. The shift didn't announce itself. It appeared in smaller ways, a message sent earlier than usual, a call that lasted just a little longer than necessary, a tone that tried to return to something familiar but couldn't quite find its place. That's how pressure shows up when it has nowhere else to go. 3 days after the final confirmation emails came through, Daniel called again. I was in the kitchen, rinsing a cup I had already cleaned once. The water ran longer than needed. I turned it off before answering. Hi, Mom. Hello. There was a pause, shorter than before, but more deliberate. I've been thinking, he said. I waited. We should sit down, go over everything properly. Everything has already been reviewed, I said. I mean, together. I dried my hands slowly, setting the towel back on its hook. That's no longer required, I replied. Another pause. Then, you're making this bigger than it needs to be. I considered that, not defensively, just to see if there was anything in it I hadn't accounted for. I don't think I am, I said. You changed things without even talking to me. I changed things because they needed to be changed. That's not how families work. I leaned slightly. Against the counter. That depends on the structure, I said. He exhaled again, a little sharper this time. So what now? He asked. That depends on what you're asking. I'm asking where this leaves us. There it was. Not the documents, not the accounts, the position. I let the silence sit for a moment, not as resistance, but as space to answer accurately. It leaves us in a different arrangement, I said. What does that mean? It means expectations need to be redefined. That sounds like a contract. In a way, it is. He didn't respond immediately. When he did, his voice was quieter. That's not what I want. I understand that. Another pause. Then, what do you want? The question was direct, clear. I appreciated that. I want consistency between what is said and what is done, I said. That's fair. Yes. So we can fix that. I didn't answer right away, because the word fix implies restoration. And this wasn't about returning, it was about establishing something new. We can build something different, I said. But it won't look the same. He was quiet for a few seconds. Then, and Chloe? She remains part of that, I said. She doesn't need to be involved in this. She already is. That landed. I could hear it. She's just a kid, he said. She's observant, I replied. Another silence. Not defensive this time, reflective. I didn't think it would matter like this, he said. That was the first statement that approached acknowledgement. Most things don't at the time, I said, but they do later. He didn't argue that. Instead, he asked, "Can we come by this weekend?" I considered it. Not automatically, not emotionally, procedurally. Yes, I said. You can. Both of us? Yes. And Chloe? Yes. There was a slight shift in his tone. Relief, maybe. Or preparation. All right, he said. Saturday afternoon? That works. We ended the call without anything else needing to be said. The conversation had changed shape. Not resolved, but restructured. Saturday came quietly. No build-up, no anticipation. Just the day moving forward, as it does. I prepared the house the same way I always had. Not excessively, not performatively, just in order. Clean surfaces, fresh coffee, windows open slightly to let the air move through. At 2:14 p.m., a car pulled into the driveway. I watched from the window for a moment. Daniel stepped out first. Then Melissa. Chloe followed, slower, looking around as if she was taking something in rather than arriving. I opened the door before they reached it. Hi, I said. Hi, Mom, Daniel replied. Melissa nodded. Good to see you. Chloe stepped forward and hugged me. Not tightly, but fully. I missed you, she said. I missed you too. We moved inside, took seats in the living room. The same arrangement as always, but not the same structure. There was a moment where no one spoke. Not awkward, just unassigned. Daniel broke it. We wanted to talk. I expected that, I said. He glanced briefly at Melissa, then back at me. We didn't mean for things to look the way they did. I listened, not interrupting. We thought you'd understand, he added. Understand what? I asked. That we were trying to manage everything, the travel, the timing, the dinner, it just overlapped. I let that settle. Did it overlap? I asked. Or did it take priority? He didn't answer immediately. That's when Melissa spoke. It wasn't meant to exclude you, she said. I see. That's the truth. I nodded once. I'm sure that's how you experienced it, I said. Daniel shifted slightly in his seat. That's not fair. I'm not evaluating intention, I replied. I'm observing outcome. That's when the room went quiet again. He wasn't expecting that answer. Chloe sat quietly between them, listening, watching. That mattered. I turned slightly toward her. How's school? I asked. She looked a little surprised by the shift. Good, she said. We're starting a new project. What kind? Something about family history. I smiled slightly. That sounds interesting. It is, she said. We have to interview people. I nodded. That's a good way to learn. Daniel cleared his throat softly. Mum. I turned back to him. Yes. We didn't come here to talk about school. I know. Then can we stay on topic? We are, I said. He paused. Not sure how to respond to that, because the topic had expanded. It wasn't just about a dinner or a missed call. It was about how things were understood, recorded, and carried forward. I've made the necessary adjustments, I said calmly. Those won't be reversed. Melissa leaned forward slightly. What does that mean for us? It means access has changed, I said. Authority has been reassigned. Future decisions will follow a different structure. Daniel looked at me carefully. You're serious? Yes, that's permanent. It's current, I said, and it reflects what is accurate now. Another silence. Then Chloe spoke, softly. Did I do something? The question was small, but it carried. I turned to her fully. No, I said. You didn't do anything. Then why is everything different? I considered how to answer that. Not to protect, but to clarify. Because sometimes, I said, people realize they need to organize things more carefully. She nodded slowly. Processing. Okay, that was enough. For her, for now. Daniel leaned back, exhaling. I didn't think it would go this far, he said. That's usually when it does, I replied. He looked down briefly, then back up. What do we do now? I answered, without hesitation. We move forward, with clarity. And for the first time, that didn't feel like a reaction. It felt like a structure. The house felt different after they left. Not quieter, just settled in a more defined way. I cleared the cups from the table and rinsed them slowly, one at a time. The water ran steady, the same low sound filling the space it always had. Nothing about the room had changed, but the structure had. That's the part people don't always see. Change doesn't always rearrange the outside. Sometimes it simply removes the parts that were assumed. That evening, I didn't turn on the television. I sat in the chair by the window and let the light fade naturally. Cars passed now and then, their headlights moving briefly across the wall before disappearing. At around 7:30, my phone buzzed. A message. Not from Daniel, from Chloe. Hi, Grandma. I forgot to ask you something today. I read it once. Then typed back. What is it? There was a short pause before her reply came through. For my school project, can I interview you? I felt something shift. Not emotionally in a loud way, just a quiet recognition. Yes, I wrote, you can. Thank you, she replied. I need to ask questions about family history. I looked at the screen for a moment before answering. That sounds important. It is, she wrote. My teacher said we should talk to someone who remembers things clearly. I smiled slightly. That's a good idea. We set a time for the next afternoon. Nothing formal, just a conversation. When I put the phone down, I noticed how different this felt from the earlier exchanges that week. There was no urgency, no negotiation, just clarity of purpose. The next day, Chloe arrived alone. Daniel had dropped her off, but didn't come inside. That, too, was a change, a small one, but noticeable. She walked in with a notebook in her hands and sat across from me at the table. I wrote some questions, she said. I see that. She flipped the notebook open, smoothing the page with her palm. Okay, she said, glancing down. First question. Where did our family start? I considered that. Not because I didn't know, because I wanted to answer it in a way that was useful to her. Families don't really start in one place, I said. They move, they change. But what matters is how they carry things forward. She wrote that down, carefully. Next question, she continued. What's something important you learned? I paused. Not long. Just enough to let the answer settle into something simple. That people show you who they are through what they do, I said, not what they say. She looked up. Can you explain that? Yes, I said, but it's easier to understand over time. She nodded and wrote again. We went through a few more questions like that, some about where I grew up, some about what things were like when Daniel was younger. I answered them all, not in detail, but with enough structure that she could follow. About halfway through, she hesitated, then asked, Can I ask something else? Of course. She looked down at her notebook, then back at me. Why did you leave the airport? The question was direct, clear, and expected. I didn't answer immediately. Not because I didn't want to, because I wanted to answer it without adding anything unnecessary. I saw something that helped me understand the situation better, I said. What kind of thing? A photo. She nodded slowly. The one Dad posted? Yes. She looked down again, processing. They said it was just bad timing, she said. I'm sure that's how they explained it, I replied. Was it? I let the question sit for a moment, not to avoid it, to frame it. It showed me what I needed to see, I said. She didn't write that down right away. Instead, she looked at me. Are you mad? No, I said. Then what are you? That was a better question. I thought about it, not searching, just selecting. I'm clear, I said. She held that for a moment, then nodded. Okay, she wrote it down. Clear. After a few more questions, she closed the notebook. That's all I have, she said. Those were good questions. My teacher said to ask real things. She's right. Chloe stood and walked over, giving me a brief hug before heading toward the door. Thank you, she said. You're welcome. I watched as she got into the car outside. Daniel glanced toward the house, but didn't wave. That was fine. Not everything needs acknowledgement to be understood. That evening, I sat back at the desk and opened the folder again. Not because anything needed to be changed, because I wanted to confirm everything was in place. Accounts aligned, documents filed, authority reassigned. There were no loose ends. That's when I noticed something small. A final confirmation email, time-stamped earlier that afternoon. Trust activation complete. I read it once, then closed the folder. That was it. Not dramatic, not loud. Just complete. I returned to the living room and sat down. The same chair, the same position, but without the background tension that had been there before. That's the part people don't always talk about. Resolution isn't always a moment. Sometimes it's the absence of what used to be there. A kind of quiet that doesn't need to be filled. I picked up my notebook one last time and turned to the first page I had written after the trip. Patterns don't need permission to continue, they just need silence. I read it again, then added a final line beneath it. Clarity doesn't raise its voice. It changes the structure. I closed the notebook and set it aside. The house remained still, unchanged. But now, everything inside it matched what I understood to be true. And that was enough. If stories about quiet boundaries resonate with you, you're welcome to stay.